Our guest today is Steve Ward, founder and CEO of Authenticate, a platform for identity verification, background checks, and consent-based screening that helps companies prevent fraud, protects assets, and build trust online. Steve's team combines ID forensics, biometrics, watchlist AML screening, and business or person verification so platforms can know who they're dealing with, from fintech onboarding to short-term rental guest screening. He spent years in the identity space and is focusing now on making verification automated, scalable, and product-led. Steve, thanks for making the time today.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
If you could start first with Authenticate, just give us what is that one breath overview? Who you serve, what do you help them do, and why it matters now?
Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. We are a software as a service that is designed for companies that don't want to piecemeal together their identity verification and fraud prevention solutions. We are, for all intents and purposes, a technology aggregator that has brought together lots of different forms of technology to be a one-stop shop for all your verification needs. So if you're looking to mitigate risk, deter theft, protect your assets, add more trust and safety, and essentially try to strengthen or harden your platform to prevent bad actors from doing bad things, you would use a service like ours to do that.
Got it. And what do you think is the key benefit that makes Authenticate different? There's a lot of competition in this space today.
Yeah, there is a lot of competition, and a lot of companies out there have commoditized several of the products that we offer by being a one-stop shop and being a security first experience that allows you to essentially be able to verify all of this personally identifying information and not take responsibility for siloing that data. And having to create a bunch of security protocols on your end, we're taking all that responsibility off the table for you. And so we give our customers the ability to step up their level of friction, really based upon the signals that they see from the data that they're gathering. And it's really up to you as a customer to decide whether or not you want to completely white label the solution using a full code experience where you're able to utilize our APIs and factor them into your product very seamlessly, or if you really don't have a ton of resources available to you and you really just need the functionality without all the code. We have a no-code solution that makes it really easy for you to get what you need without having to build. And so we offer the whole gamut and give our customers the ability to pick and choose what they need and to be able to do it very efficiently and effectively. We also have a unique sort of model in the sense that we're a usage-based model, kind of like ChatGPT is, right? Where our customers will purchase service credit and then draw down that credit over time as they utilize the platform. And so rather than locking them into long-term contracts with big minimum monthly commitments, our customers are able to be very economical in how they use our services. And so we believe very firmly in the idea that you crawl before you walk, before you run. So our customers can basically implement our solution and then test it and see how it's working, and then add more features and benefits as they grow and take more advantage of the platform over time.
Do you find a lot of your customers, are you replacing existing solutions, or is it more manual workarounds that you're able to just operate and systematize for them?
So a lot of our customers are experiencing new attack vectors that they hadn't seen before. And so with the rise of deepfakes and other types of technologies that are allowing bad actors to do bad things, our customers have to sort of harden their defenses in a manner which they hadn't really done before. And because they're seeing a greater frequency of these attacks, the manual way of doing it just isn't very practical anymore. And so we help eliminate that head count. A great example of ideal customer for us would be a call center, for example, right? Where typically they have to go through several steps in order to be able to prove that the individual on the other end is who they say they are, right? And in our case, we have the ability to send a link out to that individual. They can go through a pre-configured flow in order to complete the authentication process, and then the call center can have that rest assurance that they can just proceed with that individual. without having to take a lot of time to ensure they are who they say they are. So in our research, we found that the average call to a call center could be as much as 14 minutes long. Cut that call down significantly. And so we can save our customers a lot of time and money on headcount and man hours to be able to do these processes automatically as opposed to manually.
Yeah, a lot of times you don't think about the friction that's put in place there when going through the ID verification process, when you have, especially for important transactions, financial matters, healthcare matters. I know those are important verticals for you guys. And the value that additional minute, 60 seconds, 90 seconds from a time perspective and just being able to handle more calls. Once you do that math for somebody, it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Our customers are essentially trying to economize everywhere they can
Hmm.
without sort of compromising the integrity of their process. And so they see identity verification and fraud prevention as a necessary cost. It's just a question of, how do you contain that cost and what is the most practical way of doing it? And so when you think about scale, using a solution like ours scales very nicely. you know, we had a customer at one point that was doing sort of a lottery type giveaway of relief funds for COVID. And this was a couple of years ago now, but it was essentially funds that were available on a first come, first served basis. And so there was over 1 million people that were eligible for this relief. We were seeing as many as 40 different verifications a second over a period of 2 days. We did over 1 million verifications, almost 1.5 million in just 48 hours. And so if this was a process that they had in place, it would have taken them weeks to work through the verification process of all the applicants in order to determine, which were real and which were fraudulent. So it's a really nice solution depending upon, it works for smaller companies that really just have one-off needs, but it works really well for enterprises as well.
If I could repackage, you've taken a what's commoditized product, right? There's a lot of solutions that are out there, but you're approaching the market in a more customer friendly way, dynamic pricing or just scaled pricing based on the level of effort they need. It's not just a one piece of software out of the box, and able to serve a much broader market than perhaps somebody that's just more enterprise focused.
Correct. Yeah. And the interesting thing is that because it is a sort of product led growth, our customers have the ability to sort of tinker with it and decide to what extent do they want to use it. We have a flagship product called Medallion, where essentially you're able to configure a workflow really based upon your needs. You could choose from 5 different forms of identity verification, and then you can do more enhanced checks like database level verifications and criminal background checks, federal checks, national checks, county level checks, civil checks, employment, education, professional licenses, sex offender checks, global watch list checks, motor vehicle records. And so essentially, depending upon your particular needs and where the risk factors lie, you can configure the flow based upon your requirements. And so we work with a lot of two-sided marketplaces, for example, where there's one company we work with that matches tutors with students, right? And so in their case, they want to make sure that the students are who they say they are, that they're of a certain age. So age gating is as a need that we address very well. But then they also have these adults that are interacting with children, and they want to make sure that these adults aren't registered sex offenders or convicted felons. So, different types of checks for different users on the same platform. We give you that flexibility to create workflows for each sort of set of individuals that you're looking to verify.
Yeah, even so my daughters play club sports, and now they do digital ID verification for confirming the age of the sports players so that they're ranked in the proper age group. There really is a lot of use cases. And in fact, when we met initially, you guys are serving even beyond the Fair Credit Reporting Act, just the financial decisions that are related to credit decisioning. You guys are going beyond that, like you just mentioned, with looking at criminal backgrounds. Can you talk a bit about some of those use cases?
Yeah, right now, one of our biggest use cases is short-term rentals, using our tools for trust and safety, as well as risk mitigation and compliance. A lot of our users in this vertical are concerned about chargebacks and disputes. They get people who will make a booking request at the last second. They'll essentially come in, they'll have the use of the property. Sometimes they do damage, sometimes there's theft, and then they get a chargeback the next day saying that the person whose credit card was used wasn't involved with that stay, right? And so we can really help prevent that sort of thing by ensuring that the identity that's being used for the credit card is the same identity as the person making the reservation, right? But then you also have buildings and communities and associations that require background checks on people that are staying for short-term rentals as a means of security and safety for the long-term residents of those properties. And so doing a full-fledged tenant screening isn't very practical, right? If you're going to be renting out a one-bedroom apartment in a smaller community that's not exactly a luxury rental, and you may be renting that place for $50, $60, $70 a night, a $30, $40, $50 background check is just impractical, right? But meanwhile, we have access to the same sources and the same methods that are used in the tenant screening industry, but without the heavy costs of compliance priced into those checks. So being able to offer that screening for those particular needs are very helpful as well. And then, lastly, you have issues where there may be guests of guests, and you sure that everybody who's staying at the property has been verified. Beyond the short-term rental community, I mean, we're very deep into account creation, account resets, account recovery, preventing hostile account takeovers. We work with energy companies, healthcare providers, financial services companies. So if somebody has lost let's say their third-party authenticator app because they got a new phone, or they lost their phone or something like that, there's a reset process that needs to take place. And so we can help automate that as opposed to having to require humans in the loop. But we're also very big into online communities, gaming, gambling, age-gated related areas. And then there's essentially a lot of other types of verticals that require the features and function that we offer, like e-signature and remote online notarization. And then beyond that, we work with insurance companies and surety companies and hospitality companies. We're truly a horizontal SaaS. I mean, pretty much wherever you're concerned about people pretending that they, are somebody else, or that they're not who they say they are, then that's really where we come in.
What market dynamics are driving the growth in this market today? Where are you really seeing customers reach out for, and what they're trying to solve?
Well, it's interesting because every day we have people that are contacting us that are looking for a smarter, better, faster solution to what they're currently doing, if they're doing anything at all. And so just earlier today, there was a prospect that reached out to us and said, we really are looking for a more unified solution, and they don't want a disjointed type of implementation that requires them to use multiple vendors, because that's a real value proposition for us, right? When it comes to implementing a solution, the more vendors that are involved, the integrations that are necessary, then the more knowledge that there is required. And when there
And
comes
maintenance.
yeah, exactly. And different contracts and pricing and so forth. So as a company that has a product manager, let's say, who's responsible for that, if that product manager moves up or moves on, there's a ton of knowledge transfer that's required in order to maintain that business continuity. Whereas if you're using a more unified solution like ours, and there's a single point of contact and a single point of integration, and there's just one bill, and it's all very straightforward and comprehensive, then there isn't as much risk involved when that person moves up or moves on.
Yeah. And where do you see both your customers, but then your competitors as well? Where are they falling short today? Like, is it account creation, those takeovers, and what's the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of different banks and credit unions and financial services companies that are experiencing a huge amount of fraudulent activity that essentially could be a huge issue for them, especially when it comes to like regulations and different agencies that are looking for this type of activity, right? When it comes to like money laundering and that kind of thing. I think there's a big lawsuit against Zelle that they're not doing enough to prevent fraudulent activity over the bank to bank transfers. And so companies like Venmo and PayPal and Zelle and these other types of money transfer services have to step up their game. And, what happens is, and this is true in the background screening industry as well, there are associations that form that essentially try to develop industry standards and best practices to prevent further legislation. So
Right.
you mentioned earlier the Fair Credit Reporting Act. That's a pretty comprehensive law that's designed to give the consumer rights in the event that misinformation is being used to render a decision that could adversely impact them. So when it comes to hiring or housing or lending or credit or insurance or anything where there's an underwriting decision involved, the consumer has rights to ensure that the information that's being used to make that decision is current, complete, and accurate. But there is this huge blue ocean of other areas that we serve that you need this type of tooling to eliminate risk and deter theft and to protect your assets and to add trust and safety and security for your users. And these are, areas where you're not required to give the individual end user, real insight into your decision making for why you are going to prevent them from gaining access to your products or services. That's part of what I think makes this country so great, right? Is that as a business owner or an operator who uh, wants to ensure that they have the highest fidelity and integrity in their particular offering, they can be as rigid or as strict as they want to be in determining reasons why they don't want to do business with certain people. And that's their right. That's their freedom. So we're here to kind of help those companies do a better job of that. One of my customers, for example, is a caregiving platform. So talking about pet care, child care, elder care, and you're sending people into other people's homes. And so whatever your policy is for determining who's going to be allowed on your platform and who you're going to represent as a non-risk is up to you, right? Because just because someone doesn't necessarily have any criminal history or indicators of bad activity in their past doesn't necessarily mean that they might not go off the reservation and do something wrong. One of our more popular products is monitoring. So we have a product we call True Continuous Monitoring, which allows us to plug into over 85% of the arresting agencies around the country, so that if anybody is ever booked or warranted or wanted or incarcerated or imprisoned, you'll get a notification indicating that, this is a new risk factor. So you can decide to take action and restrict or revoke their access or permission to, your property, location, product, or service as a means of risk mitigation. And so when somebody has a run-in with the law, they become a greater risk, right? And that might run the risk of theft or some sort of action that could put your system or your services at risk. And we're here to kind of help you spot that risk and take appropriate action.
Yeah, I can imagine healthcare companies, banks, really a lot of service organizations that would want to be monitoring that type of information about their employees and wanting to take action. So childcare, right? Daycares, that would be really valuable information. My experience with trying to do background checks, it's basically that it's all a spot check.
Yes, exactly. So you have the just in time sort of check that you'll do where, when you first bring somebody on board, you're going to check to see if there's anything that's currently pending or has been decided already. And there's a gap between, when someone is arrested and then when that activity is adjudicated through the courts. And so it's one thing to do an initial check and then a periodic recheck, which a lot of people will do is you'll essentially run a criminal background check and then they'll periodically recheck that person, whether it's every 6 months or a year, which in and of itself can be cost prohibitive depending upon who the vendor is that you're using. But when you have somebody who's been cleared and then you put them on a monitoring and then you get notified of new activity that's taken place at the arrest level, then you don't have to worry about that information trickling down into the courts before it becomes official record. You can take immediate action at the point that that person becomes an immediate risk.
As you think about the year ahead for Authenticate, what are you looking at that defines a great year for the company today? Do you have revenue target in mind? Are you looking at launching new products? Like what does that 12-month pathway look like?
Yeah. So for us, we've been growing pretty steadily, and thankfully, we haven't really had a need to invest too much into outbound. A lot of our business comes to us very organically through platform integrations and search. And fortunately, generative AI really likes our name and likes what we stand for. So, when someone starts typing into Perplexity or Gemini or Claude or GPT, what's a good identity verification service or background check company or whatever, we're being recommended, which is terrific. So, we want to continue to essentially verticalize in the various industries where we're getting initial traction. And we want to continue to do more platform integrations and get into more app marketplaces because that leads to more discovery and it drives more business. To be fair, as far as the product portfolio is concerned, really what we want to start offering is a bit more of the device intelligence, giving our customers more signals and awareness about the digital fingerprint of the entity, we'll call it, that is accessing their platform, right? Because now that you have all of these AI agents that exist out there, there are machines that do a very good job of mimicking people, whether it's their voice or it's the other biometrics like their face, through deepfakes and things like that, being able to detect things such as proxies and VPNs and flagging certain device IDs and looking for the operating system and other indicators of a potential fraud is really helpful in sort of determining where and when to add more friction, right? So if our customer sees a device that's been to their platform and accessed an account before, you don't necessarily have to put as much barrier to entry in place for that individual. But if it is a device or it's a network or it's an IP, it's a geolocation, it's something that isn't to be expected, then that should raise some concern and be an indicator of more friction that should be required. And so we're in the friction business, right? We're here to sort of help you decide where and when to add that level of friction if necessary, right? And so by adding more things like passkeys and reauthentication measures, we have a product that we call Reauthenticate, where essentially if somebody had initially proven their identity by taking a picture of their ID and a selfie, and then this person comes back to your platform, using a device that you haven't seen or on some sort of a VPN or a proxy or, in a location that's outside of the usual area in which they log in, you could prompt them to just take another selfie and enter a 6-digit code that we'll send to their email so that there's sort of 2 factors of authentication that are required for them to regain access, but they don't have to take pictures of their ID again. So this is just some product that we offer that gives our customers that ability to, again, add friction where they believe it might be necessary to sort of protect the accounts of the individuals that they serve.
But I love that positioning that you're in the friction business because so many digitally native companies are focusing on designing their products on removing friction, but you're focused on putting purposeful friction in there. Like if there isn't room for concern, you don't need to add additional friction. But when there are those things, like if someone's logging into my bank account from the Maldives, I can pretty much guarantee that's not me.
Yeah.
So, there's a need for some additional ID verification and to make sure that the account is secure and that someone's not trying to spoof my logins.
Mhm.
So you're leveraging marketplaces and integrations as your source for growth, which a lot of organizations maybe haven't considered that, right? So it's those partnerships that are helping you lead growth. What is that constraint to getting more of those partnerships or getting into those marketplaces that you're trying to eliminate as you start to think about that growth story for the business today?
Well, again, as I sort of mentioned earlier, like even with us, as a company is looking to add, different forms of identity verification and fraud prevention, typically they use multiple vendors in order to create a very robust solution. And by us being a singular point of integration and offering many products, we're sort of relieving them of that type of burden. There's a company out there that we've worked with called Rudder, and essentially they are a what I would say a very platform agnostic API that allows you to be able to integrate with a ton of different platforms that exist out there, using them as sort of a central point of integration. So as far as we're concerned, we don't want to have to manage too many different integrations ourselves, right? Be able to offer these app marketplaces that exist out there. So there are different like CRMs and CMS solutions and e-commerce platforms and different types of products that exist out there that allow you to bolt on the functionality that you need by simply switching on an integration. And so for us, we actually have to have a dedicated resource who manages all of these different integrations that we have, because these different platforms and services are constantly upgrading and adding more features themselves and are rewriting their own APIs, and they require these updates. So it's not like we just integrate once and then it's done and we don't have to look back. There's a lot of maintenance and support that's necessary in order to continue to be able to have these integrations working properly. So for us, it's really about staffing up intelligently and adding headcount where it's really necessary. Fortunately, with all of the new coding agents and various Gen AI that is helping with engineering, we're actually able to multiply the output of our engineers and programmers and developers without actually having to add more headcount. So for us, a real KPI is revenue per employee. That's something that I'm deeply concerned about. And so over the next 6 months to a year, I really want to focus on trying to increase that number and drive more revenue without driving as much headcount.
And so sounds like you're using AI to help scale overall impact of your existing employees. What are some of those other levers that you're pulling to increase the revenue per employee? So it's kind of the both sides of the equation, right? So you've got
Sure.
the revenue growth aspect of it, but then keeping overall employee numbers as low as possible. Which one are you focused on?
Again, it's doing as much as we can across the board, right? So, I have to add a BDR, I have to add a marketing intern, adding more customer support. And the thing is, as the business grows and we take on more customers and we have more responsibility, we have more need for addressing the inbound, whether it's through support requests or it's inquiries about the products. We have to be able to manage that very efficiently and effectively. So it's really about delegating and managing the responsibility of all this communication that's required by entrusting certain individuals who are very talented and hardworking and can manage the load. So we want to be able to do more content marketing. We want to be able to start doing outbound sequences and essentially trying to go to market ourselves more aggressively and finding customers who haven't found us first. So these are certain things that we can use agentic AI for without having to add more people, and then essentially plug a person into that process when we have the need, after we've sort of established communication and there's been interest there. And now it's about answering very specific questions about their particular implementation and being confident that we're able to give them what they need.
So all of those use cases, it's amazing how businesses today are able to test, like you just mentioned, content marketing. Go back 4 or 5 years ago, you need someone to write the content. You need to figure out what the strategy was, what the intention of the content was. Blogs were really big because you were optimizing for SEO. Now you have to focus on GEO, but the actual time between idea for content and when content can be produced is just compressed so much with AI that businesses can do that without actually having a full-time staff or a writer or even a freelancer, right? You can get probably 80% there with AI, and then add your layer of expertise and refinement on top of the content, and it just accelerates. And then, like you said, once you've proven out that it works, then you can go hire somebody to run it and scale it and just build on what the proof case that you've already built.
Exactly.
It's such a different dynamic than it was just a few years ago.
Yeah, totally. And so for us, again, because we really have a product led growth strategy for the sales that are required. I mean, I still do a lot of founder led sales, and that's primarily for the enterprise customer. But even when I have a smaller business or, a medium sized company that reaches out to us, it's not necessarily going to bring us a ton of business. I still enjoy the conversation and just the general discussion around what their needs are and what their problem is, because it really keeps me plugged into the zeitgeist. And that way I'm able to ultimately lead from within the organization and be able to communicate to the various stakeholders in our company kind of what the market is looking for right now and how we can address their needs.
Yeah, new product ideas, I'm sure, come out of those conversations all the time.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to shift now and talk about a recent decision or a important decision that maybe the organization has made, and it could be pricing, packaging, partners, or product, whatever that is, and just talk through your decision making process, how you went through weighing and measuring what the different options would have been, criteria maybe you used, assumptions that you had to make. How did you go about tackling that large decision as CEO of the business?
Well, I think probably one of the biggest concerns that we have is pricing, right? And
Mhm.
making sure that we're protecting our margin and that we are profiting off of our products that we sell. For all intents and purposes, when it comes to utilizing data as a service, we're really in an arbitrage business, right? Because we're getting this information wholesale and then we're providing it retail and we need to make money in between, right? And so there's the idea of being an end user and then there's the idea of being a reseller. And in some cases with some of our vendors we're end users, in other cases with other vendors we're resellers. And so what we've wanted to do is basically create products that drive revenue with higher margin and offering other kind of freemium services to kind of draw in that customer, right? And help them commit. Well, the fact is that costs are rising across the board and our vendors are increasing their prices and we have to respond as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we have more of a usage-based model where, there isn't minimum monthly commitments. There aren't long-term contracts. And so what we had been doing was offering promotional tiers where essentially our customers can make larger deposits, and the larger deposit, the larger the matching bonuses that we would give them, right? And so this was something that we had been offering consistently. And what we decided to do is, because the customer is essentially pricing themselves in at first and then completing their integration and continuing to use us, we decided to make this promotional matching credit sort of a one-time only offer as
Mm.
opposed to a regular reoccurring offer. And the reason for that is because, once you've tested and completed your integration and you want to bring it to market, make sure that it's meeting your needs, at that point, you're just going to continue to use us without thinking about shopping around or switching us out with other vendors
Yeah,
because
the switching costs are high.
exactly, exactly. So what we want to do is sort of motivate you and encourage you to make as much of a deposit as you can up front and take advantage of our promotional offer to secure as much additional credit to really drive down that average cost per verification. But then once you've exhausted that promotional credit, then you're at a sort of list price. And then depending upon your volume, we would be willing to give you more discounted pricing if you're willing to make a commitment, right? And so we're kind of moving towards more of a subscription model and recurring revenue that will help us with being more consistent and not having to essentially worry about as much risk to our revenue stream, right? By
Mhm.
locking in that consistent revenue from a month to month basis, right? So that's been a difficult kind of consideration to make because we don't want to alienate our customers and we don't want them to feel like they have to make that commitment. But, if they're really concerned about pricing and they're looking to get the best value, then we need to lock them into some sort of an agreement so that they can essentially drive down that average cost per check and maintain that price point, throughout the life of their relationship with us.
Yeah, what you're forcing the customer to reveal is what is their motivation. Are they price sensitive? Are they more value sensitive? Right.
Right.
And you can actually build product value and messaging and even your sales approach around specifically those decisions, right? If they're
Yeah.
front loading to take advantage of the pricing offer, then there's a margin maybe concern in those customers that'll help you when it comes time for renewal.
Yeah,
Was
exactly.
this decision, did you test it ahead of time? Did you market test it first with some customers to see how it would work, or was it more internal and rollout?
So, it's an interesting question as far as, how do you test these decisions? I'll give you a great example. We have a very large customer who does a very consistent amount of volume with us, and they make very large deposits. And essentially, it came time for them to re up. And, they had taken advantage of our promotional pricing since they became a customer. And when I invoiced them, it didn't include the promotional credit that they had expected and that they had received in the past. And when I was questioned about how come that's not there, I had made it clear that this is something that we're offering to customers when they come on board initially. And in their case, we had given it to them multiple times, but we've since discontinued that. And now we're going to have to continue to invoice at cost. But essentially, if you're interested in locking in that rate that you had secured through the larger deposits, then we would just need you to make a commitment to a certain monthly volume in order for us to give you that preferred rate. And so, it's interesting because their usage fluctuates on a month to month basis. And so if they do this in some months, they might actually have a higher average dollar cost basis. And then in other months, they'll have a lower average dollar cost basis. And then over time, you have to figure out, what is that weighted average? And, it becomes very difficult for them to be able to determine what's the best, level for them to commit to. And so by not making a commitment and having to pay list price essentially, but without the long-term commitment or the minimum monthly commitment, then for sure what you're paying. And there isn't that volatility in the pricing. So we didn't get a lot of pushback, which is great because we know that if they were to switch to another provider, that provider is going to lock them into a 3-year contract and require a very significant minimum monthly commitment in order to secure a rate that might be lower than our list price, right? And so again, with the switching costs and that volatility and the uncertainty of whether or not they're going to meet that minimum monthly is basically a risk that they're not willing to take. And that kind of proved to me at least that offering the promotional credit for the initial deposit is a good strategy. And then, not requiring, but offering a discounted rate for a monthly commitment is something to give them as a choice to make them feel, they have that ability to sort of the power of determining the pricing that they're looking for, but not being pressured into a contract that they're not comfortable with.
And it must have been a tough decision, right? Sounds like this was an important client for you guys. Maybe the risk of losing them certainly would have impacted top line. So that conversation with them initially, it sounds like you broke it out into say, hey, you still have the power. You have the power to make the decisions on ultimately what you're going to pay. But you knew on the back end that if they're going to go somewhere else, your alternative to what you were already offering them was already a higher commitment level, likely at a higher per unit cost. So you felt pretty comfortable with what the new pricing structure that you're going out with.
Yeah, because we have to make the same decision ourselves. There's a lot of different vendors that supply us. And if we were to shop around and go to another vendor, there's the switching cost. And then there's that uncertainty and that risk that the pricing isn't going to be what we think it is. And so that's something that you can't really anticipate. It's something that you have to sort of hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And that's not necessarily a risk that you're going to be comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with it, right? So I imagine my customers wouldn't be comfortable with it either.
Yeah. So obviously you work a lot within the data side. When you're looking at what's guiding your decisions, data gets noisy sometimes, right? The signals kind of get mixed up, and you're as a CEO, you're not really sure which way to go. What's that main operating principle that you use in order to kind of calm the noise and really focus on what the data is actually trying to tell you so that you can make an informed decision?
Well, I think it really just boils down to the quality of the data and
Mm.
the efficacy of the solution that's being provided. There's a good example is our document verification and the forensics that are involved. There are new forms of identity being created every single day. We are able to authenticate photo ID from 190 countries up to 250 countries and territories and issuing bodies worldwide. It's over, I think at this point now, the document library that we license has more than 8,500 different ID types in there.
Wow.
And so whenever a state, province, a territory, a country issues a new form of ID, our forensics provider has to template that ID and determine what are the tests that they can perform to detect any type of forgery or fraud or tampering of that ID. Well, sometimes those IDs are coming into our ecosystem before they've actually even been templated, right? And so there's this conversation that we need to have with our vendor to say, "Hey, look, this is an ID that's failing. And we're very confident it's authentic. Why is it failing?" Right. And so they have to do their research and determine if it's an ID that they've seen before and if they've seen it enough to be able to detect any of these types of anomalies that they look for. And so for us, could we potentially switch to another vendor and do like a side by side comparison and try to see if they're any more effective than the vendor that we have in place? Sure, that's definitely something that could be considered. But again, there's that switching cost and there's the risk that we might be going from, what would be considered a very good solution to maybe not quite as good solution. And you're not going to really know until you've fully implemented that decision and you're out in the wild and you're seeing how it's really responding to the market. So for us, we're far more comfortable with what we know. The devil's in the details, and it's what you do know that is valuable, and what you don't know, which is really scary. So we really try to trade on what we know and what we're confident in. And so when we have, data or some sort of need that hasn't been addressed before, we like to work with who we're familiar with and work with them to try to address that problem and come up with a solution as opposed to jumping ship and trying to find an alternative vendor or provider that might potentially have a better option for us. But it's a risk that we're very concerned about taking.
Yeah. So as you start to think, we talked earlier about your growth goals for the next 12 months. What's that next growth experiment that you're going to try to run for the company?
It's definitely going to be that more outbound kind of generation where, essentially you're looking for high intent customers that are in the market for what we offer, being able to target them effectively, reach them cross platform, email, phone calls, LinkedIn, that kind of thing, and messaging them with a very personalized type of message that speaks to their need. We don't want to be a solution in search of a problem. Right. So we need to make sure that we're identifying customers who are experiencing that problem. They may not know that we exist as a solution and being able to speak to their need and offer them, what we have to offer. So that I'm far better at sales than I am at marketing. So, being able to outsource that marketing responsibility to an agency that's very good at doing that is really where I'm concentrating at this moment. Bringing in a full-time resource to do that is a big risk and can be very
Yeah.
expensive. So I'm trying to be very economical in doing that and choosing an agency partner that, is very good in this particular niche of the B2B SaaS type of offering. And hopefully, we make a good choice and, it's mutually beneficial and, we can grow together and, they can increase my top line and I can invest further into their agency. And then maybe once that's working and we have these sequences that are functioning properly, then I can bring on board a full-time resource to sort of manage that role and that responsibility and transition away from the agency once we've kind of developed a you know, a process that's working effectively for us.
Sounds like you're approaching a problem. Most businesses start there and
Yeah.
trying to create and generate demand. You have the benefit of the demand coming to you already because of the marketplaces and the integrations that you've done. And now you're solving for those first principles around lead generation, which is, it's actually a great place to start because you already have a proved out value for the product.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're very fortunate that we fit the product to market, and so we know, that there is a real need for what we offer. And the good thing is that I don't have institutional investors. I have bootstrapped this company for the most part, and so I'm not essentially chasing growth at all costs. It's more of a very kind of strategic, tempered growth plan that
Mhm.
will. And so I'd rather grow more slow and steady than kind of out of control and not being able to manage that demand if it came in too fast or furiously. So we're trying to be very strategic in terms of how we concentrate our growth. And I'd like to focus more on the enterprise customer because fewer customers, but larger revenues. And so the challenge for that is that, that's not as much of a product led growth strategy. It's more of a sales led growth strategy. And there's only so much founder led sales that I can do. And then it, becomes another risk to hire an enterprise sales representative to come in and make sure that you made the right hire and that they're very good at revenue creation and that they offset their own cost. Right. So,
Mhm.
it's a very delicate time to really accelerate growth, but I feel like we can do it very strategically and pragmatically, and hopefully everything else just kind of falls into place naturally.
I wish you the best of luck, Steve. So thanks for coming on the growth mandate. I really appreciate the chance to go deeper on Authenticate and your vision for the market and where the growth will come for the organization. I know leaders listening to this will take a lot from the conversation, especially in the way that you think about solving some of those challenges. Thanks for being here.
Thanks again for having me, Brad.
Yeah, my pleasure.